That close? You don't know basic math!
I studied all night.
Get out of my classroom. You think this is a joke, boy? Mr. Henderson's voice cracked like a whip across the silent room, shattering the hum of the air conditioner. He wasn't just angry, he was offended. Offended by existence, offended by the audacity of presence. Marcus didn't flinch. He sat there, a ghost in plain sight, his pencil hovering over a piece of paper that contained the crime of the century, a correct answer without the proper steps. The prompt on the board was simple arithmetic, basic addition and subtraction of two numbers, elementary stuff. But Marcus hadn't used the rows and columns. He hadn't carried the one in the way Henderson demanded. He saw the numbers differently. He saw them as waves, as colors, as distinct entities that merged effortlessly. "I asked you a question," Henderson roared, leaning over the desk, his face flushing a deep, unhealthy crimson. "You refuse to show your work because you don't know how to do it. You're guessing. You're cheating. How dare you mock my lesson with this gibberish?" The class erupted in snickers, a chorus of compliance. They loved a scapegoat. It made them feel safe. It made them feel like they belonged to the system. Marcus slowly capped his pen. The sound was a tiny click, loud as a gunshot in the tension. He looked up, eyes dark and unreadable, harboring a universe of calculations that Henderson couldn't begin to fathom. "Standards must be maintained," Henderson sneered, pointing to the door, "and you, son, do not meet them." The hallway was a tunnel of judgment. Every locker seemed to whisper the same accusation. Stupid, lazy, cheat. It didn't matter that Marcus had solved the equation in 3 seconds while the rest of the class was still writing their names. It didn't matter that the numbers whispered to him in a language older than Henderson's degree. In this institution, the method was the god, and the result was irrelevant if you didn't bow to the altar of mediocrity. Marcus walked with the heavy tread of a soldier returning from a war nobody else knew was happening. He was a silent genius in a world that demanded loud obedience. He remembered his father's voice, echoing from a memory before the accident, before the silence took over the house. "Numbers don't lie, son. People do. People lie to protect their egos. People lie to keep their power. But a 2 is always a 2. Marcus touched the rough fabric of his hoodie. It was his armor. They saw a thug. He saw a mathematician. They saw defiance. He saw efficiency. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as intended, to filter out the anomalies, to crush the diamonds into dust before they could cut the glass ceiling.
It went back to the kitchen table, the smell of chicory coffee and old paper. His grandfather, a man who never finished the 6th grade but could calculate the load-bearing weight of a bridge by looking at it, had taught him the secret. "School gonna teach you the slow way, Marcus," he'd say, his fingers rough and calloused, shuffling dominoes like they were pieces of a grand design. "They teach you the slow way so they can charge you for the time. But the universe moves fast. You gotta see the space between the numbers." That was where the magic lived, in the negative space, in the subtraction that created addition. Henderson saw 5 minus 2. Marcus saw a relationship, a distance, a vector. He didn't need to write down the borrowing of a 10 because the 10 was already there, fluid and shifting. He had tried to explain it once in the 2nd grade. The teacher had called his mother to recommend special education. Too fast, too weird, too quiet. Lesson learned. Hide the gift. Be the ghost. But today, the mask had slipped. Today, the numbers had been too loud to ignore, and Henderson had taken it as a personal insult. The brilliance of a black boy was always mistaken for arrogance by those who relied on the syllabus to define their intelligence.
The bench was hard, polished wood, designed to be uncomfortable. Penance furniture. Marcus sat with his hands clasped, the picture of contrition to the untrained eye. But inside, his mind was racing at the speed of light. He was calculating the probability of suspension, the variable of Henderson's tenure, the coefficient of the principal's indifference. He watched the second hand on the wall clock sweep past the 12. Tick, tick, tick. Time was the only thing you couldn't get back, and they were stealing it from him. gallons of it. Buckets of potential poured down the drain of bureaucracy. The door opened. Principal Miller, a man whose smile never reached his eyes, beckoned him in. "Mr. Henderson tells me you're disrupting the learning environment, Marcus," Miller said, sitting behind a desk that cost more than Marcus's family car. "He says you're refusing to participate in the curriculum." Participate, that was the word. It meant submit. It meant slow down. "I solved the problem," Marcus said, his voice raspy from disuse. "I just did it in my head." Miller sighed, a patronizing sound that grated on the soul. "Show your work, Marcus. If you can't show it, you didn't do it. That's the rule. Standards must be maintained."
The next day, the retaliation arrived. A pop quiz. 10 questions. All simple addition and subtraction, but with large, clumsy numbers designed to force the tedious carrying method Henderson worshipped. Marcus looked at the paper. He saw the answers instantly. They floated above the page, glowing. 458 minus 29. 429. Boom. He wrote the answer. No scratches, no columns, no crossed out numbers. He went down the list. Done in 40 seconds. He put his pencil down. The class was still scribbling, struggling, erasing. Henderson marched over, snatched the paper, and didn't even check the answers. He uncapped his red pen, the sword of the mediocrity, and slashed a giant F across the page. The ink was wet, violent, looking like a wound. 0, Henderson announced to the room, holding up the paper like a trophy of war. No work shown, therefore no thought process, therefore cheating. The logic was circular, a snake eating its own tail, choking on its own bias. "You will learn, boy, that my way is the only way. Until you can prove you understand the mechanics of plus and minus, you understand nothing." The humiliation was the point. It wasn't about math. It was about breaking the spirit.
They thought they had crushed him. They thought the F was a stop sign. They didn't know it was fuel. In the sanctuary of his room, under the cover of darkness, Marcus wasn't a remedial student struggling with subtraction. He was a monolithic intellect engaging with the architecture of the universe. He wasn't browsing social media. He was on forums usually reserved for doctoral candidates, correcting code, optimizing algorithms, finding patterns in prime numbers that professors had missed. He typed with a ferocity that would have terrified Henderson. Here, in the digital abstract, nobody cared about his hoodie. Nobody cared about his zip code. Nobody cared about the color of his skin. They only cared about the output. User ghost_logic was a legend on the boards, and ghost_logic was currently failing second period math because he refused to count on his fingers. The irony was a bitter pill, but he swallowed it dry. He needed a plan. He couldn't just pass. He had to dismantle Henderson's reality. He had to prove that the standards were just walls built to keep people like him out.
The library was the only neutral ground. The librarian, Mrs. Gable, was deaf in one ear and blind to school politics. She let Marcus sit in the back, amidst the dusty encyclopedias that hadn't been opened since 1998. He wasn't studying for Henderson's class. He was preparing a defense. He pulled the Principia Mathematica from the shelf. Newton, a man who reinvented math because the current math wasn't enough. Marcus traced the equations. He took out the failed quiz, the red F staring at him. He began to write on the back. Not the simple subtraction Henderson wanted. He began to write a proof that demonstrated that his mental method was not only valid, but was a derivative of Vedic mathematics, a system thousands of years older and infinitely more efficient than the Western rote memorization Henderson clung to. He was building a weapon made of logic. If they wanted to play by the rules, he would use the rules of the masters. He would turn the plus and minus mockery into a dissertation on efficiency. The ghost was about to manifest.
"I've done you a favor," Henderson said, his voice dripping with faux concern that was more insulting than his rage. He waved a pink slip of paper. "Remedial placement. Special needs assistance. It starts tomorrow. We can get you some blocks, something tactile to help you count." The condescension was physical, a heavy smog in the hallway. "You just sign here, admit you're struggling, and we can stop this charade." Marcus looked at the paper. It was a trap. Signing it was an admission of incompetence. It would stay on his record forever. It would bar him from AP classes. It would kill his college applications before they were even written. "I don't need blocks," Marcus said quietly. "I need a teacher who understands number theory." Henderson's face went cold, the mask dropped. "You arrogant little, you think you're smart? You're a disruption. You're a zero, and I will make sure the world knows it. I'm going to put a problem on the board tomorrow during the district observation, and when you fail, you'll be out of my class for good." The district observation, the holy grail of bureaucratic oversight. The superintendent would be there, the principal, the board. It was Henderson's stage to show off his discipline. He planned to use Marcus as the prop, the example of the difficult student that justified his harsh methods. Marcus knew the game. He went home and cleaned his window. He turned the glass into a battlefield. He practiced the Henderson method, the slow, painful, step-by-step crawl. Then he practiced his own. He timed the difference. He anticipated the question. Henderson would pick something nasty, something with decimals, maybe negative integers, something designed to trip up the mental math genius. Marcus closed his eyes and built a palace of numbers in his mind. He walked through the halls of calculus and the corridors of trigonometry. He wasn't just preparing to solve a problem. He was preparing to dismantle a philosophy. He wasn't fighting a man. He was fighting a century of bias that said a black boy in a hoodie couldn't possibly be the smartest person in the room.
The air in the room was stale, recycled, and heavy with dread. The suits at the back were checking their watches, eager for lunch. Principal Miller was wringing his hands. Henderson was performing. "Today," he announced, his voice projecting for the back row, "we will address the fundamental issues of discipline and calculation. We have students who believe they are above the rules." He locked eyes with Marcus, a predator spotting prey. "Marcus, to the board." The class held its breath. This was the execution. Marcus stood up. The chair scraped against the linoleum, a jagged sound. He walked to the front. He didn't drag his feet. He walked with the precision of a clock mechanism. He took the chalk. It felt light, brittle. Henderson smirked and wrote the problem. It wasn't simple addition. It was a complex polynomial equation mixed with a subtraction of large integers, designed to look messy. "Solve it," Henderson commanded, "and show every single step."
Marcus began. He didn't just show the work, he weaponized it. He started writing the standard method Henderson wanted. He wrote the columns, he wrote the borrowing. But then he didn't stop. He moved to the next panel of the chalkboard. "Step 2, he said aloud, his voice steady, carrying to the back of the room. Analysis of the inefficiency of the standard algorithm." The superintendent looked up from his phone. Marcus began to write a parallel equation. He wrote the Vedic method. He wrote the algebraic proof of why Henderson's method took 12 steps, while the mental method took 2. Chalk dust flew like smoke. He was writing faster than Henderson could process. He covered the board in white fire. He wasn't just solving the problem, he was lecturing. He was teaching the class. "The subtraction of the variable x relies on the assumption of the integer's stability," Marcus recited, quoting a theorem Henderson hadn't read since 1985. The class watched, mouths agape. The ghost had become the professor.
"That's enough," Henderson barked, realizing he was losing control of the narrative. "You are defacing school property with nonsense." He reached for the eraser, desperate to wipe away the evidence of his own obsolescence. But a voice boomed from the back. "Sit down, Mr. Henderson." It was the superintendent. He was a mathematician by trade before he became an administrator. He saw what was on the board. He saw the beauty of it. "I said, let the young man finish." Henderson froze, his hand hovering midair, a statue of defeated tyranny. Marcus didn't flinch. He continued writing. He was nearing the conclusion, the final answer. He circled it 3 times. Then he drew an arrow back to Henderson's original problem. "The error," Marcus said, turning to the room, "is not in the student's mind. It is in the limitation of the teacher's method." He pointed to a flaw in Henderson's own setup of the problem. Henderson had written it wrong. Marcus had solved the corrected version.
The silence now was different.
It wasn't fearful, it was reverent. The superintendent walked to the board, his shoes clicking on the tile. He adjusted his glasses and traced the lines of Marcus's proof. Euler's method, he muttered, applied to basic arithmetic. Fascinating. He turned to Marcus. Where did you learn this, son? Marcus looked at Henderson, who was shrinking into the corner, a man made small by the truth. I didn't learn it here, Marcus said. I learned to survive here. I learned the math from the world. The superintendent picked up the F paper from the desk. He looked at the red ink. He looked at the perfect answers underneath the slash of the pen. Mr. Henderson, the superintendent said, his voice ice cold. It appears you have been failing a student for being smarter than you. Standards must be maintained, indeed, and your standards are woefully inadequate.
News travels faster than light in a high school. By the time the bell rang, the legend of the chalkboard had spread. The boy who outsmarted Henderson. The boy who did calculus to solve subtraction. As Marcus walked out, the hallway felt different. The lockers didn't whisper anymore. They stood at attention. Students who had laughed yesterday nodded today. It wasn't just about being smart. It was about standing up. It was about refusing to be small. Marcus saw Henderson through the open door of the classroom. The man was putting his apple-shaped paperweight into a cardboard box. Administrative leave, pending investigation. The system had finally worked, but only because Marcus had forced it to. He had jammed the gears with his brilliance until the machine broke. He didn't stop to gloat. He didn't need to. The numbers had spoken. The balance had been corrected.
The walk home was lighter. The gravity seemed to have lessened. Marcus passed the playground, watching the next generation counting on their fingers, struggling with the physical reality of numbers. He stopped. He wasn't going to let them be crushed. He wasn't going to let the Hendersons of the world tell them they were guessing. He pulled out his notebook. He wasn't just a student anymore. He was a guardian of the logic. He wrote down a new idea, a tutoring program, the speed of thought. No columns, no borrowing, just pure, unadulterated vision. He would teach them what his grandfather taught him, that they were not empty vessels waiting to be filled with rules. They were fires waiting to be lit. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vectors of orange and purple, a perfect equation of light.
They called it a comeback. Marcus called it a correction. The state math Olympiad. He had decimated the competition. Not because he knew more formulas, but because he understood the language beneath them. He stood on the stage, the gold trophy heavy in his hand, feeling the heat of the spotlight. It was a long way from the back of the classroom, a long way from the red F. He looked into the crowd and saw his mother, crying tears of vindication. He saw the superintendent nodding. He saw the empty seat where Henderson might have been. He realized then that the journey wasn't about the math. The math was just the vehicle. The journey was about the right to exist, the right to be excellent without permission, the right to solve the problem your own way.
They will try to subtract your worth. They will try to divide your spirit. They will tell you that you don't fit the formula. But remember this, the variable that changes the equation is you. You are the anomaly they can't calculate. You are the ghost in their machine. Never show your work if it slows you down. Show your results. Let them argue with the outcome while you change the world. Numbers don't lie, son. People do. And we are done listening to the lies. Subscribe to Silent Genius Stories, because justice isn't given, it's taken.